Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Nettopak. Welcome to Tea and Magic. It's Friday, the most magical day of the week. I have an amazing guest and an amazing topic. Today, we're talking all about crystals. And I just want to say I searched high and low for the absolute most incredible human being / goddess I could find. And I came up with the best of the best. The queen herself, Ashley Leavy, is here with us today. She is the founder and educational director of the Love and Light School of Crystal Therapy, and she teaches people how to use crystals to make positive changes in their life. She's been seen on NBC and a bunch of other radio shows and blogs. She's all over the place. She's got experience based on over a decade. She's taught 100+ classes, and she's the author of Crystals for Energy Healing and Cosmic Crystals. I mean, like, how do you find the time to do all of these things? Ashley, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yes, yes. So first of all, before we start and we get into you and we find out more about you, you showed me your teacup. It's Tea and Magic, and I need you to show everybody the teacup and tell us what you're drinking, because this teacup set is absolutely stunning.
So there's a cute little teacup with an owl, and it says the Night Watchman. Last year, I went on this huge, journey into rediscovering my roots and my ancestry. So I took my mom on a trip to Ireland, and while we were there, I picked this up. And it's one of those little two-parters. So it has the kettle that sits in there. So I have, 2 cups of tea for Tea and Magic instead of just one.
I love it. Well, it's a long episode, so you might be drinking all of that during this hour that we have together. I'm so excited to have you. I know that we are going to talk about a plethora of things. Oh, and Jeannie says hi. Hi, Jeannie. We're going to be talking about a plethora of things related to crystals. I can't wait. Everything from a little bit of introduction to some maybe more advanced things, maybe some new techniques people haven't heard of. But first, I would love to know more about you. How did you get into this work, and where did you start?
Yeah, I mean, if I really think back to the very beginning for me, it goes back to my childhood. I was really fortunate as a kid to get to spend a ton of time with my grandparents on weekends sometimes or during summers. And I had a really special relationship with my grandpa, who is still with us. He's going to be
Oh,
94 years old in just about 2 weeks. So really grateful for that relationship. And he was a mineral collector. He was a crystal collector, but he was super scientific minded. He was a chemical engineer. Everything was science and numbers and data. And I think he was really fascinated that the earth could create these things through, these different chemical compounds. So for him, there was an interest that way. And he loved to collect and catalog them and number them. And it was that whole kind of outlook on crystals. But we would sit in his study and he would show me his crystals for hours and tell me about them, tell me where they came from in the world and what they were made of and how they were used in industry and how they were mined and all these things. And I became fascinated with that. So I think when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, he gave me a book, and it was the Smithsonian Institute Guide to Crystals and Minerals. And I would just pour through that book for hours and hours. I had the most beautiful photos. And in that book, there were also these little snippets and tidbits about the history and lore of crystals. And that was the first time I was introduced to this idea that crystals could be magical. Crystals had more to them than just this scientific side. And so, I got really into crystals when I was a kid and collected them. And then I got away from it a little while when I was a too cool teenager for anything.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, like rock music and parties and
Yeah,
all
exactly.
that.
So then in my early 20s, when we start to rediscover ourselves, I really got back to things that brought me joy in my childhood. Artwork and crystals were one of those things. So I started to read everything I could. This is back in the early 2000s, so before online stuff was super great. But I would watch YouTube videos, and finally the opportunity came up to take an in-person training, a workshop about crystal healing. I had started working part-time at a new age store while I was in college, and there was this amazing healer and teacher out of Chicago who was coming up to our shop in Madison, Wisconsin to teach about crystals. And she was teaching Melody's methodology. If you don't know Melody, she wrote the Love is in the Earth series of books. She was one of the people way back in the early 90s to be writing about crystals. And her book was the very first book I ever read about crystals. So I was so excited to take this workshop. And I really just thought it was something I wanted to do for myself. So I took this training. Lo and behold, my life was completely transformed, blown wide open. And I thought, this is the most amazing transformative experience. I want other people to have this experience. So when I thought I was taking this training just for me, for my own spiritual growth, for my own personal healing, this became something that I knew I wanted to share with other people. So I started taking classes left and right and learning everything I could and doing sessions for others. So I started to build my own crystal healing practice out of this store that I worked at while I was going to school for botany. So I realized somewhere down the road that botany as a career path wasn't really feeling aligned with my soul's purpose, especially since, all I could really do was get a job making GMOs for Monsanto or something like that. That didn't feel very good.
No.
So I decided to take a huge leap of faith and focus on crystal healing at the same time that the opportunity to become part owner in that very same New Age store came up. So I took that leap, started doing that, and I found that the thing I really loved most about my crystal healing sessions was at the end where I get to teach people what they could do for themselves with crystals and really empower them. And that led me to teaching classes locally, and then I started traveling internationally to teach and brought my classes online for people across the globe.
That is an incredible story. I love that. And I love that your grandfather was your first introduction to crystals. I feel like so often we are sent these soul guides, right? Through our family, through teachers, but usually it's through a loved one. I know my own uncle inspired me when I was younger as well. And it's so great that your grandfather is still here. Happy birthday, Grandpa, if you're watching this. But that we have these teachers that are sent to us that are like, okay, we're going to put you on the right path. And I love that he was the more brainy, scientific version, because I feel also growing up that we enter that world, especially our age right now, maybe not if you're 12 or 13 at this moment in time. But people really weren't talking a lot about crystals back then. They weren't talking about metaphysical. They weren't talking about spirituality. So I would love to know in the early days, like when you first realized that there was something more, like we talked about magic, you mentioned Magick, who did you talk to about that? How did this manifest? And like, how did you go throughout your world when the world wasn't really open to that kind of conversation back then?
I'm so glad that you're bringing this up because it's really true. We kind of take for granted sometimes now because we're so lucky to have all
Oh,
these amazing resources at our fingertips, right?
yeah, look on Instagram. It's like, click on crystals and it's like 300 million images and it's so open. But yeah, it definitely was not back then.
Yeah, even so, my first training I took in 2007, at that time, it was like you really had to hunt to find some kind of crystal education. It wasn't easy. So when I was a kid, that really was non-existent. And let's face it, like when you're growing up, everybody tells you, you can be a ballerina, astronaut, president of the United States, whatever, but no one tells you you can be a crystal healer. Like that's not a job
No,
option.
I know, right? You
So,
could be an
um,
astronaut, but not a crystal healer.
right.
Like that's totally open to everyone. Just yeah, but that was it. That was it. Yeah, I totally understand.
Exactly. So, again, it goes to my grandpa. He was always so supportive. And when I started to really get into the history and lore and legend behind stones, it kind of also opened this gateway to mythology. And he would bring me books on Greek and Roman mythology,
Mm.
on mythology from the Americas, from Asia. And he would always just introduce these things. And I was such an avid reader as a kid. Like it was just, I could go in my room and shut the door and read for hours. I was that like kid with the book, right? But it was something that I think he encouraged. And then I started to piece together, how all these different things were interrelated and intertwined. And it became something that I think kind of fueled that inner fire to go seek more and more. And like I said, at first, because there just wasn't a place to turn to, and that was one of the biggest obstacles to learning about crystals back then, there was no guidance or mentorship. There were a few prominent authors in a very small niche, and you could read their books. And if you were lucky enough, maybe you could track them down every couple years and take a workshop. And it was difficult because it was like you had to travel a lot for that.
Mhm.
And it wasn't an easy path, but I'm so glad it's something that I stuck with because I was feeling really called to it. And I never, ever would have guessed that it would lead me to what I'm doing now, but I'm so grateful.
Oh, I love that so much. Again, we're always so guided to be in this alignment, right? Um, so everyone, or at least I believe everyone, I know that's been my case and many of the guests on our show, when they find that path, that thing that's calling them, and they get that instinct, like, wow, this is something that's really fascinating, and I feel this is the path that I'm meant to go down. That path is never easy, and we start from one place and then we end up as teachers, but everything in between is, like you said, that transformational experience. And I'm curious if you're open to talking about first working with crystals in healing yourself, prior to working with clients and such, and what that transformational experience was for you.
Yeah. So for me, I think it started at a time where I was feeling really lost in my life. Like I said, I was going to school for botany. It was like all this societal pressure and family pressure to go have the really good paying job that was going to be super secure and all this stuff. And you feel like that's what you're supposed to do, right? We're all kind of pushed into those different directions. And I think I was feeling already that something wasn't right, something wasn't in alignment. So my first really reconnection with crystals came because I was feeling lost and I felt like I needed some support and some guidance. I needed to develop my intuition to help me make these important life decisions as I was moving forward. And that's kind of what started things. But then I realized that because of those big questions, big unanswered questions in my life, I was struggling with a lot of other things. I had crazy amounts of stress and so much anxiety, and I was not well. I was like not a mentally well person. I was feeling so scattered and lost and overwhelmed. And I think that constant stress and anxiety was really hard for me to cope with. And although I tried other things to kind of manage that, like meditation, and nothing was really totally doing it for me. For me, the thing that really started to help was working with my crystals. I think I'm a really tactile, kinesthetic person.
Yeah.
I have to like touch it and feel it and see it. And for me, crystals were that thing. So when I would hold my crystals and meditate with them and try and calm all that anxiety and stress, that's what finally did it. That's what finally got me out of my mind and in my body and in the present moment rather than worrying about everything. And about a year and a half into my crystal practice, I started to have some really difficult health challenges. And it turned out after a whole lot of doctor's visits and many appointments and tests that I had a genetic heart condition, and it was causing a lot of issues. It was very, very scary time in my life. And it was something that I was struggling with and found was really relating to that stress and anxiety that had been having. And for me, crystals were that anchor and that support and that reminder that I had strength inside of me, that I could get through
Mm.
this. And although, of course, you still go see your doctor, you still go do all the things medically that you need to do to take care of your vessel. For me, mentally and emotionally and spiritually, I needed that support that came from somewhere else. And so that was kind of where the personal work started. And that's where I thought, okay, I need more guidance and more mentorship. And I wanted to take that training. And from there, it was such a powerful experience. And I thought, I can help other people have the same support that I'm feeling. And other people need to know how good this is because it wasn't a big mainstream thing back then.
Oh, absolutely. So many of us go through that spiritual awakening process. And I do believe that we all, I don't want to say the word suffer, but we suffer what we're meant to teach. And it's not even that, some people go through trauma as children and they go and they support people going through that trauma. And I think working with crystals, it's more about these are the tools that really helped me, especially with physical illness. I hear that so much with healers, hands-on healers, people that do Reiki, people that work with crystals, that a lot of times it is like healing ailments in the body, and realizing that Western medicine, as amazing as it is for certain things, is not the end all be all. And I'm curious, before we dive into some magical wisdom from you, I am curious if you have ever run into a period of time or a discussion where you've had to defend the healing work, working with crystals, with people, clients, whether that be judgment from the outside world, where people really were like, no, crystals are crap. I don't believe in that. Because a lot of people still think that, and that's a shame. But have you had that experience where you have had to step up and really defend that they are an incredible healing tool?
I think anyone who does energy healing work has had this experience.
Yes.
It's something that comes in up. But, for me, I'm naturally a very skeptical person. I just am. So, I always have to try something out for myself. I like overanalyze it. I think about it. But for me, it was just undeniable the changes and support that I was experiencing.
Mm.
And people say, well, that's just placebo effect. Well, here's my honest to goodness viewpoint on this. So what if it is? If this physical thing helps me anchor the power of my mind to create change, is that not healing? Is that not healing work? So for me, like that's where I'm at. Like I feel as a teacher, I've kind of like moved past that point where I'm going to work to convince somebody. My work now at this point is to help people who are ready to receive that.
Yes.
But are we going to come up against that? Of course. Are there going to be people that you're close with, that you love, your friends and family, that don't believe in what you're doing, that don't agree with it? Yeah, it happens. It does. But you just have to ask yourself, like, what is true in your experience
Mm.
and go with that. And I think that science will eventually catch up enough to figure out why this works. But are we going to put dollars into researching that when we still have to solve a lot of other health challenges for people? Of course not. It's unimportant. And the bottom line is, if it works for you, like listen to your heart, trust your inner guidance, and go with it.
Yeah, and not to mention that we do live in a society where drugs are sold by big pharmaceutical companies to make money, and they're really just putting the band-aid on the problem. It's like getting people addicted to medicine, and there is amazing medicine out there, but we do live in a world that doesn't necessarily want people to heal, because
Yeah.
if they do, they might gain their power, they might gain their senses, they might come out as an incredibly magical person. And it's unfortunate, but I love the fact that nowadays there are so many of us out there and so many of you out there helping people go through this process. And that, like you said, it is more prevalent. Like it's so much easier to take a class right now than it has ever been. So I would love to dive into some of the wisdom that you share. Say you are a newbie and say someone is like, I'm ready. Someone like you, when you first came to crystal work, how would you kick off this experience for them? Where would you even start explaining the world of crystals?
My best advice, if you're just starting out, is to enter this work with an open mind and without judgment, because we are so prone to, like I said, over analyzing and criticizing our experience and having judgment. Well, why did this person have this experience, but I felt different? Well, why does this book say this thing, but this book says this totally opposite thing? Here's the thing with crystal work, it is very, very subjective, right? We're all having our own individual
Mhm.
experiences with our crystals. So, where you might read in one book, amethyst is great for helping relieve headaches. Another book might not mention that at all. Or you might try working with an amethyst for that reason then and not have that experience. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your crystals. And I think that we place a lot of emphasis on teachers like me to guide us. And that's good, that it can be helpful in guiding you in the right direction. But ultimately, your experience is really what counts. People can help you facilitate the experiences that you have. They can give you more tools and techniques and open you up to ideas and concepts that maybe you weren't familiar with. But you need to trust your own experience and your own inner guidance when it comes to your work with crystals. So that's the biggest thing. Just like set your judgments and expectations aside. Be really open to whatever's coming through for you, because that's where you're going to find that richness and that magic in your crystal work.
I absolutely love that. I think a lot of people do put so much emphasis on the tools and the teachers. I mean, there's almost an addiction sometimes with people to going to like, I need to take as many courses as I can. And that's not to say they're not valuable, but you've met those people that are like, the answers are out there. They're always out there. And I love when I hear teachers like yourself and healers say, no, these are just tools. I'm just your guide. Really, the answers are inside of you, and I'm just helping you access them. I mean, that's essentially what you just reiterated. So, what are some of the basic tools, basic techniques that you could start off teaching someone if they're like, okay, I get that concept. I'm willing to take the leap. I want to go through my own personal growth. I've got the slew of crystals, or maybe one crystal. How do you even choose your first crystal? That's a great question to start.
So I think personal empowerment is really the key there. So just as you would trust yourself in anything else, right? You have to buy a new car. You're going to do a little research and ultimately you're going to make the best choice for yourself. The same kind of goes with crystals. Maybe there's something that's happening in your life and you feel like I could really use some energetic support with this. So maybe you do a little research online or you look up in your favorite book, what crystals would be good for helping you manifest a new career, or what would be really good for helping you release grief, whatever it is that's happening in your life. Well, then ultimately you go out to find that crystal or choose that crystal. Be open in the moment. I do have a bricks and mortar crystal shop, and people come into our store all the time and they say, I'm looking for a crystal for love. What's the best one? Like, that's the language I hear all the time. What's the best one for love? Because we all want the best, right? Like, we don't want
Yeah.
something just okay. We want the best. And I say, well, really, it depends on you. So I encourage people, go to your local crystal shop or new age store, and without any agenda in mind, just allow yourself to kind of scan with your eyes or with your hands all the different stones. See if there's something that really catches your attention, that draws you in, that you feel really connected to. Don't worry about what you've heard about that crystal in the past or what it says about that crystal right there. Just be really open. Sometimes it'll be almost like the crystals are pulling your hands in like a magnet. You might feel that. Other times it'll be more visual. And this just depends on your psychic gifts as a person. Are you more clairvoyant or more clairaudient or more clairsentient? What catches your eye? What looks extra bright and sparkly that's like really pulling you in and catching your attention? That's probably a crystal that you might need to work with. Pick it up and see how it feels. Take a few deep breaths. How do you feel in your body? Where do you feel this energy in your body? How does this make you feel emotionally? And really connect with the energy of that stone for a moment. Once you've done that, if you feel like, yeah, it just feels good, I don't know why, then go back and do a little research about that crystal and read about what it might do for you, because more often than not, you're going to find it is exactly what you need. And I love to tell this story because this was like one of the best examples of this ever. Like I said, the best crystal for love. I had a woman who came into my shop and she was like, can you help me find the best crystal for love? I've heard it's rose quartz. Where is that? And I encouraged her to just try this. And she ended up choosing, because she really wanted to work on like this relationship with this guy that sounded like maybe wasn't super into her, but she was kind of chasing after. And the crystal she ended up choosing that was really calling to her was a little piece of copper. Copper is good for self-love.
Oh
Copper is
my
about
gosh, I
nourishing
love
the self.
this.
It really, and I mean, that's what it is. So for her, it was just like we were talking about, instead of looking externally for
Mhm.
something, it was about turning within and realizing that she needed to love herself first before trying to chase after this relationship that wasn't working. And she had the realization, oh my gosh, I think I'm just putting this vibe out there that I'm so like needy about this thing and I need to create it for myself and it will come to me. So that's like one of the best ways to choose a crystal is just listen to whatever's happening for you in the moment. And one thing I want to say about this, I did mention so many of us, we think about a problem we're having and we research a crystal that might be good for that and we rush out to buy it. One of the other ways that I teach that I think is so empowering for people is to teach you to work with what you've got. It isn't always
Mm.
about going out and buying the next biggest shiny thing. So, and I mean, that's fun, right? Like, let's not be mistaken, that can be fun. But it's also about learning to work with what you have. So, next time you feel that draw to go out and get the next new thing, look at the tools that you already have available. Maybe you just have 3 or 4 crystals, but you know what? You can do a lot with 3 or 4 crystals.
I love that story. That is incredibly empowering because we're speaking about love as well, and so many people again are looking for the answer out there. How do I find that? And that's a perfect example. I mean, not to get into relationships, but we're constantly looking for that person that's going to come save me or fix me or heal me. When in reality, it's like I need to heal myself, and it really does start with self-love, and that is the process that I think we're all as a world moving into right now is learning how to self-love, how to self-care so that we can go out there and change the world. And that's such a beautiful example. I absolutely love that. And I know I've so many times walked into a store, even when I wasn't even looking for a crystal, something just was staring at me. And I'm like, okay, I need to buy this. Like, I think I wish I had it. It's over there. So I don't want to get up and get it. But I have this beautiful quartz crystal that's in the shape of a lion's, or I'm sorry, a tiger's head. His mouth is open. And I was just flicking through Etsy one day and I started to work with the goddess Durga at that point, and I wasn't looking for it at all. And I just flipped through this and I was like, that's mine. I need it. And now it's on my altar and I use it all of the time. But that's another great example of like these crystals, these tools, they're going to find you when you need them the most. So I think it's great to just have trust and surrender to that process. So
Yeah.
yeah. And so say you have your crystal, you're like, I've got this thing, it's called to me. I want to find love. I mean, let's take a woman like this, for example, that is looking for love. That's such a great topic because I think everyone is. And they found that crystal that they want to work with, that called to them. What's next? What do they do? What do they do with this beautiful tool?
So this is where it gets really cool, right? Because you have so many different options and pathways available to you when it comes to crystal work. So you can keep this crystal, like you said, on your altar. Use this as a point of focus and personal empowerment that, think about what your altar really represents to you. It's that place where you do connect with spirit, where you do ground yourself into the earth, where you empower yourself. So having that point of focus, because crystals are these natural amplifiers of energy, really helps facilitate that connection. You can also, if it's, a smaller pocket stone, carry that stone with you. Put it in your pocket, tuck it in your bra, keep it in your handbag, put it on your bedside table while you're sleeping. Keeping that energy around you as a constant reminder, as a literal touchstone for that thing that you're holding space for in your life, that thing that you're trying to create, that vibration that you're moving into alignment with. Another thing that you can do is place it in your pillowcase if it's small, or on your bedside table, so that at night, while you're sleeping, the energy of this crystal starts to inform your dreams. I'm sure lots of you watching do some sort of dream journaling, or at least a little dream analysis when you wake up in the morning and think about, well, that was interesting. What is that?
Especially now after the Lionsgate, just want to throw that out there. Dreams have been crazy. I digress.
Yeah, so true. But I mean, having that crystal there again as an amplifier of energy, helping those messages come through. There are certain crystals that can also help with dream recall, dream interpretation, that sort of thing. That's a beautiful practice. You can hold your crystals during meditation. You can place crystals around you or in front of you before and after your yoga practice, or place them over your heart during Shavasana, during your final cool down. There are just some amazing ways to incorporate crystals, really, no matter what it is you're doing. One of my favorite things is super simple. It's just placing them in your environment. So, not necessarily even on your altar as a sacred object, but just in your space. So, I have a big piece of rose quartz in my living room because that's where my family spends most of our time.
Mhm.
Rose quartz is a great smoother of energy. It helps everyone stay in that place of heart centeredness and compassion. And let's face it, while we're all cooped up together for so long, everyone's feeling a little on
Yeah.
edge. It just keeps things nice and calm.
Oh, I love that. I've got rose quartz too. I've got so many different things here. So, as a witch, this show is about magic, and crystals are definitely part of that world, as we discussed. But you always see witches out there, and I do this myself, though I don't do it as often as probably others, creating spells, trying to attract money, trying to attract abundance, trying to attract love. And to me, magic is it's the conscious act of using your personal power to reach out into the universe and manifest what you want. Yes, I believe nature's magic. I believe there's a lot of healing work, but I do believe magic is a conscious act of using your intention to ask for something. Now, a moment ago, you just mentioned that crystals enhance power. And I think a lot of us, we know that, but how would you describe that to someone that like, how does that work? How can I hold this? And how can it really enhance my personal power?
So, crystals have a special, unique arrangement of all their molecules and their atoms. They have a perfect, orderly vibration and molecular structure. So, when we hold a crystal and bring that into our energy field, which is not always perfect and stable, right? It can be a little
Yeah.
chaotic at times. It goes through the process of entrainment. Our body and our vibration actually entrains to this more stable vibration of the crystal. So the same happens think about how quartz crystals are used in a watch to keep time. Quartz crystals are used in our computer's memory chips to store data. So they can receive and send energy and messages. So when we hold a crystal and we have our conscious thought, we're putting that conscious magic into that crystal. The perfect orderly vibration and structure of that crystal, plus its ability to receive, store, and transmit energy, brings in those thoughts, our conscious thoughts and intentions, and then sends them out into the universe exponentially. It's like multiplied by infinite amounts. And this is one of the reasons that working with crystals in spell jars is so powerful, with working with crystals in your dream magic practice, to create intentional pouches or to create crystal grids for healing. All of this can be really magical acts because they have this ability.
Oh, yes. I love that. What a great explanation. Because I know I've sat there many times. People are like, crystals, schmistals, like they do nothing. And I'm like trying to explain this amplification process. Sometimes you're like, okay, you don't get it. But I would love to dive in. It was such a great sharing of wisdom about, the beginnings, Crystal 101 for the folks watching that maybe aren't familiar with this world. But for the folks that are, I'm sure there are so many women and men here that have, like me, a whole plethora, and like you, a whole entire house full of crystals, and they're looking for new methods. So we had a conversation about tying crystals or working with crystals and herbs. And that was something that you were just starting to dive into. And I would love to know more about that. And by the way, I love the fact that that's combining your world of botany and crystal work. So I'm going to ask about that in a minute. But what's going on with that, with the research? How did you come up with this concept or this desire to combine those two very powerful forces together in your work?
Yeah, I think it really does stem back to my natural interest for kind of all different aspects of nature. Plants are very important to me. It is what I went to school for. I started as a horticulturist and later went for my degree in botany. And it was something that I really wanted to start getting back into from just that kind of holistic health aspect of looking at more ways to bring a broader, more complete healing into the work that I was doing. So while I was incorporating a lot of crystals, I realized that I was also using herbs for my healing, but I wasn't really putting them together. So I thought, well, how can I do this? How can I bring these two energies together? And I started to really look at some of the similarities between the healing qualities and vibrations and frequencies of herbal medicines with crystals that were kind of natural counterparts that did very similar things. So for me, this started just through creating little pouches and sachets that I would put in my pillowcase for dream work to kind of absorb those healing energies vibrationally into my aura while I was asleep. Because when we're asleep, we don't have our guard up, right? The ego mind isn't in
Yeah.
the way. So we kind of soak things in a little bit easier. But then it became more intentional and more conscious. So I started working with small spell jars. In fact, I have quite a few of them here
I
for
know, there's
different
like
things.
jars everywhere.
Yeah,
Sometimes you
I mean,
forget. You're like, what was that? Okay, yeah.
that's like a prerequisite to witchiness, right? Little
Yeah,
jars of
yeah,
health.
little jars of everything. We just like little jars, period.
So from there, I started to realize that, just like I would create crystal essences or elixirs with little bottles of crystals and then put those into a container of water. I never put my crystals directly into the water. A lot of people do that, but there are a lot of toxic crystals and things to be aware of. So I use the jar within a jar method. So I have usually a little bowl or jar with some spring water and then a little jar with my crystals, and I'll place that inside, charge up the water in the moonlight overnight, or for up to 2 weeks, depending on kind of how you do things with the moon cycles. And then you have this vibrationally infused essence. A lot of people take these essences or elixirs internally. I actually like to create mine with vibrational sprays. So I found that when I was creating my little spell jars, I got curious and I thought, well, could I just put this whole thing into my water, charge it up in the moonlight, and have my moon water with my crystals and my herbs, all those vibrations together. And then I started pulling flower essences into the mix, putting those all into my vibrational sprays and adding drops of essential oils. So I'm really pulling in plants in a number of ways. I have these herbal and crystal infused elixirs that also have flower essences and then essential oils. And I use those sprays for different things. Sometimes I'll make them according to the phases of the moon, different goddesses that I'm working with, different problems or experiences or challenges I'm having in my life. Like I have a protection spray and a manifestation spray that I use a lot. I also have one for meditation that's a very specific blend for me. And it really, I think, just helps get me into that space where I meditate without so much of the mental clutter. I have one over on my desk that I use for focus when I sit down to write or to teach or create. There's really kind of no end to the way that you can combine these things.
Oh, and what I love is that you are bringing this magic back to the earth. You're working with the herbs, you're working with the land, with the flowers, and crystals obviously are rocks, essentially powerful, magical rocks, but it's all part of the earth. And then here we're drawing in the moon. And we just have this beautiful trifecta, which I always say the trifecta is ourselves and our own power, the earth, and the moon. And of course, there's spirit out there, and that's another essence. But if we're really looking at the powerful forces that we have here in this physical presence, those are the three forces that work so well together. I would love to pause to ask about the moon because a lot of people, I know I work with the moon. She's so incredibly powerful, but some people aren't really familiar with the moon's power, especially when it comes to crystals, making crystal water, using the moon to charge crystals. Someone might ask, like, why would I even set my crystals out? And I would love for you to share your wisdom on that. Why do you charge crystals under the moon? What is the purpose of moon water and what are the benefits?
This is such a good question and a topic I'm really passionate about.
That's because
So,
you've got moons all over behind you. And I've been waiting to ask about the moon.
I started working with the moon really intensely about 5 years ago after I had a full hysterectomy. It was just 2 weeks before my 29th birthday. It was a really chaotic time in my life. And I found after my hysterectomy, I felt like somehow, in so many forms of goddess spirituality, our womb and our power from our womb is so connected with who we are as people. And all of a sudden, I didn't
Mhm.
have one anymore. Right. And it was this really confusing time for me, especially because I was having a hard time tracking natural cycles in my life. I was so used to that through menstruation and I didn't have it
Yeah.
anymore. So I became enamored with the moon, going through, instead of my own menstrual cycle, going through the natural cycle of the moon, which, as we know, ebbs and flows, it waxes and wanes. So the moon always starts as the new moon, which is completely dark, and it goes through this process where it starts to grow in light because of the reflection of the light from the sun. That's the waxing moon phases. We have the waxing crescent, the first quarter, the waxing gibbous, all the way until it gets to the full moon. So the new moon is a good time for setting intentions and that kind of thing. And when we get all the way to the full moon, the moon's in her full power. It's this great time to manifest everything that we've planted the seeds for. And then the moon begins to wane. So it goes through the phases where it grows darker, the waning gibbous, the third quarter, the waning crescent, until it gets back to the new moon. And that is the time where we start to slow down, we start to rest and release so that we can start fresh again at the time of the new moon. So for me, this became a really prominent practice and cycle in my life. And I found, just like with everything that I do, that it was really enhanced through the use of crystals. So I actually have a little, it's over on my altar, a little selenite grid that has the phases of the moon etched on it. And I use a moonstone to track the cycle of the moon and move it along these different phases. I also have 8 different moonstone varieties and I know people are like, I thought moonstone was like one thing. There are so many different types. There's like coffee moonstone and black moonstone, which I actually have right here.
Okay, Moonstone is my favorite crystal. Everything at Moonstone, and so I need to know. I need to know. After this, we'll get into that. We'll continue.
Yeah, and I mean, there's apricot moonstone and rainbow moonstone, all these different types. So I found that there's some good correspondence between these varieties of moonstone and the different moon phases. So I'll work with those during these different phases to really help me embody and remember, again, physical touchstone, remember what energy is present right now in nature through the energy of Lady Luna, through the moon. So this for me is like a way to, again, ground it into my experience, to make it more present, to make me more consciously aware of what's happening in nature and with natural cycles so that I stay more in tune with that in my own body. And this eventually led me to a whole series of lunar rituals and practices. And I eventually wrote a book about it called Cosmic Crystals. And I talk about the moon phases. I talk about the moon when it's in different astrological signs. I talk about the different moons of the year, so the lunar months, and how we have like the corn moon and the flower moon and all these different moons and what they're really all about and how we can connect with those energies to stay in harmony with nature, not only, through the ebbing and flowing and waxing and waning of the lunar cycle in a month, but throughout the year in terms of astrology and our experience here on Earth.
Oh, I love that. I think we all need to get that book. It's like I can't know enough about the cycles of the moon. And so I'm curious, I just want to go back to this, that's just such an incredible story. And first of all, I want to say that it's so powerful for women to hear this because as women are not taught to work with their cycles, we're always taught to be ashamed of our menstruation. And I feel that healers and witches, like we kind of come back into that femininity and that divine feminine and start working with our bodies. And it's almost like just like we do, people go through menopause or they have hysterectomies and they really lose that attachment to the cycle when it has to do with blood. And it's such a powerful and empowering thing to know that you can still continue to work with the moon and work with that feminine cycle, even if that's not a process that's happening in your body. So that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. But why do people put their crystals out to get charged? No. I love how we digress into the most amazing topics. And I was like, okay, scratch that. But now I'm going to ask after that. I mean, how does the moon actually charge a crystal?
Yes, thank you for keeping me on track on that like really exciting tangent. But
it was brilliant. We're not taking anything away from that. So brilliant.
Basically, because we have these different phases of the moon, right? Like I said, when the moon's at its fullest, that's that height of power, that peak of power. And think about how the moon even has an effect gravitationally on water, on the tides, on water in our bodies. So when we put our crystals out in the moonlight, it's thought that it charges them with that light being reflected from the sun, because all energy is just a light frequency, right? It's thought that it charges them with that energy of that particular moon phase. And the full moon is the most common for this. People use it to both cleanse, meaning to kind of vibrationally reset their crystals, right? But also to charge or empower their crystals. Think of it like charging your batteries, but a little bit different. Charging is like putting a specific energy into your crystals. So you can charge your crystals with your own thought or intention. You can charge your crystals with affirmation or prayer. You can charge your crystals by placing them in a dish of flowers or herbs and charging them with that frequency, or you can charge them with the energy of the moon. And although the full moon is the most common for this, you can actually charge your crystals with the energy of any phase. So look at those different moon phases and see, what kind of energies you're wanting to bring into your life, and charge your crystals under that phase and then work with them. So if you're really working on release, maybe you're looking at something in the waning phases. If you're looking at manifesting, maybe you're looking at something in the waxing phases. So really kind of plan that out and don't feel limited to just working with the full moon.
I love that. Again, we're just working with all of the different cycles here and really tuning in to Mother Nature. And we are in this beautiful human experience. We go through so much. We've got these amazing tools. And another thing that we discussed was that, whether you're in the process of transformation, you're healing yourself, in this human experience, it's not just about light. It's not just about positivity. Sometimes, or I'd say all the time, usually if you're on this path, you go through a point where you realize that there is a need to do shadow work. And I think that's something that is relatively new. I think healers have been aware of this type of work. I personally work with the goddess Morrigan. She is all about doing the shadow work, but I'm now seeing the transformation in the spiritual genre, speaking about doing healing, coming from always, like, there are some people that are out there like, let's get you positive, let's get you high vibe. And not until a few years ago did I really start seeing information and studies around shadow work. It was almost like, this is the side of us that we need to hide away from. We need to tuck over here in the corner. And now I think we're realizing that this other side of us is something that needs to be embraced. I'm curious, if you could describe in your own words for our listeners, what is shadow work and how do you work with that side of yourself?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I think you're right. For the longest time in the healing arts and wellness community, we were almost bombarded with that kind of toxic positivity, right?
Yes. Spiritual bypassing.
Yeah, definitely. Made to feel that there was something like wrong with us if we weren't these perfect beings, right? And it's like, the thing is that we're human. So shadow work is really about the act of looking at both parts of self, the light and the darkness, and appreciating that they're both part of you, instead of pushing the shadow away, pretending that it doesn't exist, not wanting to acknowledge or take accountability or responsibility for those parts of yourself. It's about looking at how was that shadow created in the first place? Where was there wounding, unacceptance, lack of love, lack of self-worth that may have created those shadow aspects of self, which are really the parts that we don't want to consciously acknowledge, the parts that we've been made to feel are unacceptable, unlovable, unworthy, and so we push them subconsciously into the shadow. Shadow work is the conscious act of moving into the shadow realm, looking at those parts of yourself that you've kind of discarded or set aside and bringing them back into integration and wholeness with the light aspects of self. And it's about appreciating yourself as a whole being and ultimately finding the gifts in your shadow. Sometimes, maybe we've been told we're too loud. Maybe we've been told that we are too much of a busybody, something like that. And we shut that part of ourselves down. But there are gifts there. There are gifts in speaking up. There are gifts in being kind of go, go, go. We have to find where that balance lies and how we can incorporate that into the light and use it for something that ultimately moves us forward in our lives and that we feel positive about. But it's kind of about shifting your mindset too, away from putting down these parts of yourself or being made to feel like they're not valuable, because they're all part of you. So it's about bringing it all back together into wholeness.
Oh, that is brilliant. I mean, again, I have been through that process. I think the spiritual awakening process is primarily accepting that shadow side. And like you said, it's about looking at our deepest, darkest traumas and things that have happened previous in life and how do we clear them. I firmly believe that our body is a vessel, and until it's pure and clear, I mean, we're always going to be going through lessons, but I do think every single human being hits a point where they can do a lot of that clearing over a several year period of concentrated time. And that clears our bodies and that clears our vessels so that that magic can flow through. Like we were just talking earlier about how creative we are and how we have all these brilliant ideas constantly coming to us. And that's because we do that work. I had a guest last week say that, and I agree with this, is that on the other side of grief, on the other side of doing the shadow work and dealing with your trauma is your destiny. And she said, you cannot access your destiny until you go through the void. I was like, absolutely. Now, say you have a client that comes to you and they are dealing with these shadows and these traumas, and how would you advise them to work with their crystals specifically? Maybe there is a technique or two that you offer right away that can get them started on that path to healing.
Yeah, so this comes from my own personal shadow work practice. And behind the scenes, I'm like working on a whole training for this because I think it's so needed. But for me, it always starts with meditation. And this is more of a conscious, active meditation because it's about going within and finding those places of wounding. So for this specific type of work, this is why I happen to have my black moonstone right here. This has been like my companion through the shadow work. Holding this black moonstone, it helps you venture into that darkness, that inner darkness, and understand first and foremost, how can you become aware of this shadow, right? What is the shadow that even exists within you? Putting a name to it and getting comfortable and familiar with it having a name, I think is an important first step. So this crystal, again, is helping amplify and support you during this practice. It's also a crystal that it is a moonstone, so it kind of has this divine feminine aspect. So it's almost kind of nurturing and tender and supportive while you do this work where you're facing this discomfort. This is specifically for me why this has been such a great companion for this. So kind of going through and accessing these parts of yourself. And when I say that, think about any time that you're triggered into a behavior pattern. This is a great place to start. Anytime you're guilting, blaming, shaming, you're feeling immense frustration you're not getting over. Anytime you are not wanting to take accountability or responsibility for something in your life, these are all the places we need to be looking for that shadow, like right off the bat. These are the immediate attention ones. Or any place where you have some unresolved emotional trauma and wounding. So really allowing that Black Moonstone to support you while you just think through this. And this isn't like a conscious thinking. This is almost a train of thought, connecting the dots, letting everything just fire away in your brain and move through, and maybe doing some journaling along with this. I find sometimes just to get some bullet points out on paper helps me understand a little bit better later. So sometimes while you're getting in touch with these different triggers or shadow aspects, let's say one of the shadow aspects is grief, right? And you're trying to work through that grief. Hold this stone, really think about grief. Think of times in your life where you felt grief, how you've reacted to grief, who was involved in those experiences of grief, how you might project your experience of grief onto others who are grieving. Think of all these things that come up of what does grief really mean to you? What does this particular shadow aspect mean to you? And just close your eyes, breathe into that, and see what comes up. It might be memories, but it also might be, and quite often is, like a symbol that pops up in your mind. Maybe all of a sudden you see a green apple. Like, I'm just throwing stuff out of the top of my head. You have no idea what this green apple means, but your subconscious is trying to share something with you. So after you work through this exercise, the next step would be for me to do a little bit of scrying work. So scrying is like the art of gazing into a surface. A lot of people use a bowl of water. Some people will use the clouds, fire. I use crystals. So for this particular shadow work scrying, I work with a black obsidian sphere and a little candle off to the side. And you let your eyes kind of soften, go in and out of focus. You get in touch with that inner magic, with that inner power. You gaze at your crystal ball or your dish of water or whatever you're using, and you focus on that symbol, the green apple. You almost project that symbol onto the surface that you're scrying on. And as you let your eyes go in and out of focus, you see what else comes through. Is more being revealed? What is present for you in that moment? And do a little journaling about that. And this helps kind of start to unlock and tease apart what's meant here, because when you do this art of scrying, you're really letting yourself get into that intuitive place where things are coming through from the subconscious, from the inner self. And it brings those shadow elements to the surface where you can identify with them a little bit easier.
Oh, I love that. I have to say, as a witch, I have not done much scrying. It's one of those things I was like, okay, there's so many things to do. But now I think I gotta dive back into that, especially using crystals. One of my favorite crystals is black obsidian. I actually have a black obsidian yoni egg that I do. Yes, people are like, that's crazy. They're like, you gotta use something a little bit more calm. And a yoni egg, for any of you that don't know, is for women. It goes up, you know where. Which I love my yoni eggs. I'm obsessed with them. But I use the black obsidian. I personally is tied to my goddess. It's tied to the Morrigan, but is very much tied to that shadow work. So anytime something comes up that's big, that's the first place I go as I utilize that black obsidian, and I'm like, clear this out. And I love that process of clearing. I'm a big fan. I'm not a big fan of being in grief, but when something comes up, I'm a big fan of sitting down and taking care of it right away. I'm like, let's just do this. Like, let's clear this out, because again, we become those beautiful open vessels. So we are almost at the end of the show. We're sort of at the end of the show. Before I ask you for your last bits of wisdom, I would just love to know if there are any topics, anything related to crystals that's something that's really powerful, that is alive for you right now, that we might not have touched base on, that you want to talk about for a few moments.
One thing I've really been loving just while we are in this time of the Lionsgate portal is we talked about crystal spell jars earlier.
Yes.
So I have a prosperity and abundance spell jar. It's actually a little vase. It's made of like a ceramic clay that I've been using during this time of the Lionsgate. So I'll probably continue to use it until the end of August. That's just what felt good for me. But basically, each and every day, because I have a whole ton of crystals, right? Like I have a lot. You could do this with little pieces of paper though. It doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
crystal. The crystal for me, again, helps amplify and hold my intention, but it's almost like a gratitude practice. So each morning when I'm starting my day, I hold one small tumbled crystal that I have in a big bowl at random. And I think about something that I'm truly grateful for, that I want to call in abundance more of. Like, I want to call more of this feeling into my life, more of this experience, more of this thing, whatever is present for me that morning. And I hold that and I just like give thanks and show gratitude. And then I place it into this jar, this vessel, this container that is holding, physically holding space for all of those things that I want to manifest. And it's such a simple practice. So any little box or pouch or jar that you have, and like I said, if you have enough crystals, do this with your crystals because they're amplifiers and they'll hold your intention. But if not, even little pieces of paper are so magical when you write those things out, and hold space physically for this gratitude that you're feeling during this time, because it has been powerful, powerful, powerful magic.
Oh my gosh. I feel like a complete, I was just actually telling, side note, one of my girlfriends the other day, and my very spiritual girlfriends, I was like, I think I'm a different human being. I think I actually turned into somebody different in a matter of days. I was just watching, this is Lionsgate, you guys. I was just watching a video of myself that I shot a week or so ago. And I was like, that's not me. Who is that person? And so, yes, if you are watching this show now, if you are watching the replay, and it is August, and by the way, Lionsgate happens every single August. This happens to be probably one of the most powerful moments in all of history, I would say, is this particular Lionsgate, but it is still going for a week or so. And you can do this next August, or you can do this anytime. There's always these amazing portal openings of energy. The energy is coming from these other star systems, giving Earth all of the juice that she needs. And so I love that you shared that, because that's great. That's so powerful. And again, like you said earlier, you can use these techniques during a full moon as well. There's always so many different times when you can pull on your magic. Before we go, I would love to know if you have a last words of wisdom that you want to give our listeners about crystals and about anything you want to share.
I do. You know, my biggest piece of advice that I can share with you is just to trust yourself. Trust yourself and what you're feeling. Allow yourself to be really present to whatever is coming up for you in the moment when you're working with your crystals, and trust your intuition. Even if whatever's coming through for you is totally different than anything you've ever read or seen or talked to somebody else about what they did, that's okay. You can't make mistakes as long as you're coming from your heart. As long as you're like in that heart space, in that present moment, it feels right to you, go for it. And the other thing is, you can always course correct. You know, if you've started doing something one way and it's not working out anymore, don't feel like you have to be locked into that. You can change your practice anytime you like and in any way you like, because it's your practice and it should be unique to you. So I encourage you to explore, to play, to find some freedom, and don't forget to pull in a little magic to your practice.
Oh, I love that, especially the play part. That's what we all need to be doing more of. And that's what brings in that beautiful high vibrational energy. Thank you so much for being a guest on our show today. Time just flies when you're having this much fun. And I feel like I just got so much new wisdom and information about crystals. I'm definitely going to try scrying after this. And I'm going to go back and watch the video and probably write down everything that you said to do. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, Ashley. We so appreciate you being here. For those of you that are watching this on our Facebook page, please feel free to comment. I know a lot of you watch the replay later. Definitely ask questions. If you have any questions for Ashley, let me know and I'll be sure that she gets them. And be sure to leave your comments. If you guys are watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, I'm going to put everything you need to know about Ashley, including her background and all of her links, so you can find her and take one of her amazing classes, because I can't even imagine. We just got like a little bit of what you offer, and I'm sure that you've got just so much more. I'm so excited for all of the work that you have coming up. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.